Yet I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak in tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, and give all of my body to the hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put away of childish behind me. But now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love.
Well, I'm guessing it's safe to assume that 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is a fairly well-known passage to many of you. Anyone here never heard that passage before? This is a passage you often hear read from or quoted at weddings and high school graduations and funerals and in greeting cards and such. And there's a lot of preachers that have actually made some very flowery statements in their comments on 1 Corinthians 13. A guy named Alan Redpath, who I'd recommend as a great commentator, said one could get a spiritual suntan from the warmth of this chapter. Wow. And then the great G. Campbell Morgan said, examining this chapter is like dissecting a flower. To understand it, if you tear it apart too much, you lose the beauty. And then the most eloquent of all, of course, Charles Haddon Spurgeon said this about 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I would, my brothers and sisters, that we could all imitate the pearl oyster. A hurtful particle intrudes itself into its shell, and this vexes and grieves it. It cannot eject the evil, and what does it do but cover it with a precious substance extracted out of its own life, by which it turns the intruder into a pearl. Oh, that we could do so with the provocation we receive from our fellow Christians, so that pearls of patience, gentleness, long-suffering, and forgiveness might be bred within us by that which has harmed us. Great statements by the great London preacher and such. And I say those, give you those quotes to say this, that those are great comments on the softer side of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. But 1 Corinthians 13 is not necessarily in every way as soft perhaps as it sometimes is interpreted as. We actually unpacked the softer side of this text at Ruby and Stephen's wedding. Remember we did a wedding one Sunday morning? That was cool. Just suddenly, all of a sudden, a bride and a groom appeared on the stage, and we just did a wedding. And we preached what I would call the softer side of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. But we do have to look at every text in its context. And 1 Corinthians 13 actually is a part of a whole letter to the Corinthian church. It's actually the second of perhaps 4 or 3 letters to this church that Paul wrote. And actually, chapter 13 is more like a rebuke than it is a piece of poetic literature that we all feel warm and fuzzy about. And so when you think about Corinthians and chapters like chapter 13, remember that this text has a context, and it's linked to a people, and the people are linked to a story. Paul wrote this letter to the Corinthians, and the city of Corinth in the ancient world was sort of a mess. It was a combination of Las Vegas, Hollywood, and New York in our understanding. It was a very prolific city. It was a very cultural city, but it was also a very immoral city into which Paul came and planted this church. And actually, a little bit to unpack the story just for review. The book of Corinth, the city of Corinth, actually in the ancient world at one time was destroyed by the Roman Empire because they were not in compliance. They were actually a bit in rebellion against the Roman Empire. So the city was leveled to the ground in 146 BC. Later, years later, to be rebuilt by Julius Caesar. And when Julius Caesar revived the city of Corinth for its strategic location, because it was a highly trafficked trade route in the ancient world, he sort of revived the city, but the problem was the city of Corinth did not have any deep-rooted kind of value system or culture or history. And so what happened to the city of Corinth is it became sort of like Hollywood. It was the place you went to make it big. There was a lot of money, a lot of prominence. The sophists and the Greek thinkers and philosophers were all very live and well in the city of Corinth. So people were going to a city that had very shallow roots and really no tradition or values simply to make it big. And so this became a place with great immorality and an opportunity to be very successful. And Paul comes into this city to plant a church. Now, this is an exciting, strategic city to plant a church, but it's also a city where you're going to come up against a lot of cultural things that are anti-kingdom, anti-gospel. Actually, such a crisis was this church plant for Paul that in Acts chapter 18, while in the city of Corinth, the Lord comes to Paul to tell him not to be afraid. Acts chapter 18, the Lord comes to Paul and says, "Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent." And then he says, "I am with you. No one is going to attack you or harm you because I have many people in this city." But this is a conflicting city. This is a city where you have people that are being successful and popular conflicting with the idea that a gospel work is coming into this city. While I was in Portland, one of the pastors on staff at Westside was actually for many years pastoring at a large church down in Hollywood, LA area, Hollywood, California. And he was talking to me about the mess that it is to pastor a church in Hollywood. Because on one end, you're sort of conflicted because you're like, how awesome is it that the gospel is going to Hollywood? I mean, Hollywood is just sending the cultural message throughout the world. I mean, Hollywood is the epicenter where really culture is being shaped and ideas and thoughts are being promoted. But a lot of people in Hollywood did not come to Hollywood to seek Jesus Christ. They're not on a spiritual pilgrimage like going to Jerusalem or something. You go to Hollywood to make it big. And so when people in Hollywood with the value systems of Hollywood become followers of Jesus, all of a sudden kingdoms come into conflict with each other. Because on one hand, there's lots of narcissism and the potential for success and fame and California bling everywhere, right? A very pretentious, narcissistic place. And then in conflict with that is the way of Jesus, the way of humility, the way of generosity, and the way of just kind of giving all for the Lord. And he was just talking to me about how conflicted that community was as you try to lead people out of the cultural vortex into the way of Jesus. And that's really what's happening here in the city of Corinth. It's Hollywood time here. I mean, they're an extremely gifted group of people. And many of these gifted people have become followers of Jesus, but old habits and old ways don't die quickly. And so when Paul steps into the story, he says a couple of things to this church. In chapter 12, as Adam rocked last week, and chapter 14, he essentially says, you're an extremely gifted group of people. But in chapter 13, he says, but if you don't have love, you are nothing. You gain nothing. And he literally says, I am nothing. If I have all these gifts, but I do not have love, I am nothing. And so really chapter 13, if you would, is spiritual gifts up against spiritual fruits. And that's really the essence of the chapter. And so if you would, Paul has been watching this community, very gifted, very charismatic, very even spiritually gifted, functioning in spiritual gifts. He talked in chapter 12 about some of their gifts that they had, words of wisdom, words of knowledge, healing, prophecy, tongues happening in this church. But then he contrasts that in chapter 13 by saying, but without love, this is nothing. Now, I know that you have noted the attributes of love that Paul brings out. And again, they're quoted in greeting cards, Christian greeting cards, and at holidays, and in warm and fuzzy environments like weddings and sometimes funerals. But notice the things that Paul says about love. They're not random in verses 4 through 7. He says about love is patient, kind, does not envy, does not boast, is not proud, does not dishonor others, is not self-seeking, is not easily angered, etc., etc. These are not just random attributes that Paul's just saying, this is what love is. He's saying this is in contrast to what you Corinthians are. For instance, in chapter 3, he said that they had been jealous and quarreling, but love does not envy. In chapter 6, he said that they were fighting and suing each other, but love is not easily angered. In chapter 8, he said they were being puffed up, but love is not proud. In chapter 11, they were being self-centered and exclusive when they came to the Lord's table. But love is not self-seeking, and love does not dishonor others. And so really what you have here is Paul is perplexed at this very gifted, charismatic, good-looking, fantastic church that has violated the way of love. They have gone in the opposite direction in the way of love. And Paul's going to say, yes, you're spiritually gifted, but don't let spiritual gifts convince you that you are automatically in the kingdom. Do you know that it is possible to exhibit spiritual gifts and not actually have your heart reformed by Jesus Christ? Now, that's counterintuitive to us because our assumption is that person's gifted, therefore they must be in the kingdom. And the Bible, Jesus, and many examples would say, not necessarily. Just because you have spiritual gifts does not mean you bear spiritual fruit. Gifts and fruit are not the same thing. Galatians chapter 5, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, those are fruits of the Spirit. And those are the attributes such as love and joy and peace and patience. So gifts and love, or the fruits of the Spirit, gifts and fruits are very different. One of the greatest indications that you actually have had your heart reformed by Jesus is not that you're gifted, but that you're bearing fruit. And fruit is virtue that comes from your life, and the only source of that could come from Jesus Christ. When you start to think about some of the gifts that can be exhibited by those who follow Jesus so-called, or those who are gifted and charismatic, on one level, especially 1 Corinthians 13, it could be said that even someone who doesn't follow Jesus could do those things. They could give their body to be burned. They could sacrifice for others. I mean, if the Christian community is the only community that ever does good, then we live in a terrible world. A couple of men who are really close to me in my life, fantastic men, good husbands, were great dads, stepped in their wives' lives when their wives were single parenting, and stepped in as a rock star, Boaz sort of figure, do not believe in Jesus Christ and do not follow him. I have an uncle named Brian. My Uncle Brian is one of the best men I know, but he is not born again. He doesn't even believe God exists. And there's where sort of the tension comes into our life to say someone can do good things and be gifted and charismatic and even used, and yet not even be bearing fruit that demonstrates they have been given a new heart by Jesus. And you say, well, really? Prove that. Well, all you have to do is look at what Jesus said. Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, very haunting verse. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many are going to say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name drive out demons? And in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. That's spiritual gifts right there. All that Jesus just said, those are spiritual gifts. And he said, there will be some who said, we did miracles, we prophesied in your name. And he says, I don't know who you are. Because you're gifted, but you're not fruit-bearing. For instance, one of the most enigmatic men in all of the Bible, the prophet Balaam. Is there a weirder guy in Scripture? He's the prophet for profit. He basically makes a deal with the enemy of Israel, God's enemy, Balak, and he says, I will for money potentially prophesy against the people of Israel. But I can't go against what God says. And so every time Balaam opened his mouth, he was supposed to curse Israel, yet he spoke some of the most beautiful prophetic utterances about Messiah who was coming and about current Israel. What a conflicted guy. When the New Testament talks about Balaam, it says nothing but bad about him. But spiritual gifts, rocking spiritual gifts, he was a prophet, but he's not even in the kingdom. Think of the first king of Israel, Saul. He became one of the prophets, yet he was walking in an evil way. Or maybe the most pronounced example of this is one of the 12, Judas Iscariot. He was there in Matthew chapter 10 when Jesus imparted spiritual gifts. Matthew chapter 10, Jesus imparted to the 12, including Judas, the ability and authority to drive out impure spirits and heal every disease and sickness. Gifts, yet no fruit. Do you know Judas did not end up in heaven? Jesus called him the son of perdition. He said it had been better that this man had never been born. Gifted. Certainly even anointed, we might say. But anointing and gifting does not indicate or absolutely speak to the fact that the heart has been changed. What Paul is saying is the telltale sign that Jesus Christ has transformed and regenerated the heart inside of you is that you love, that you bear spiritual fruit, because you can do all these things. You can perform miracles and give your body and prophesy and speak in tongues. And Jesus at the end of my life could say, "Depart from me, I don't know who you are, but you're very gifted." Those are the kinds of things that 1 Corinthians teach us. Actually, that's one of the things that I think is a great deception for many people, is that the assumption that spiritual gifts is an indication of spiritual life. Jonathan Edwards, actually, when he talked about spiritual gifts and their function in the life of a Christian, he actually compared spiritual gifts to jewelry that adorns the body. That the jewelry that adorns the body makes it look good, but it does not change the essence of who the person is. Now, am I against spiritual gifts? Absolutely not. As Adam talked about last week, it's part of body life. It's the beauty of what Jesus does in a people who follow after him. Any group of people that's connected to the vine will bear fruit in love and also will have an accompanying set of spiritual gifts to bring the mission of Jesus forward. But don't be deceived to think just because you're wearing the jewels of gifting means that you actually bear fruit. And that's really the warning that's being given to the Corinthian church, is that you've done all these things, but you don't have love. And if you don't have love, you're nothing. You gain nothing, and you are nothing. Because you're going to have your day before the one whose eyes are like fire. And he's going to be looking for the fruit of love being born out in your life. Are you connected to the vine? Are you bearing the kind of fruit that indicates a new heart has been born out in you? So that said, this I think is a huge tripping point for many of us. And I mean, probably to use the most obvious example, think of your favorite preacher. Me. No, I'm just kidding. No, probably not. A lot of people here have told me that they podcast a whole bunch of other preachers. So I know that I'm not your favorite preacher. That's okay. I forgive you. But just think of a preacher that's impacted your life. And the assumption about that guy is because when he preaches, it helps people. Maybe people get healed, people get empowered, people get set free. A lot of good fruit. You've learned a lot and grown a lot under this particular preacher. But if that preacher, gifted and charismatic as a leader, leads on stage, but then behind closed doors is rude, unkind, unjust, unloving, if he's immoral, then really his gifting means almost next to nothing. But the danger for a person like that is that they can assume, because everybody thinks that they're so great, that they're so successful, that they have the outward adorning of spiritual gifts, that they're actually right with God, and that may not be true. Certainly the man or woman is gifted, but it doesn't mean as much as sometimes people think it means. See, the kingdom of heaven is so reverse. We think it goes to the people who are in the front of the line. I mean, we think it's that preacher or that singer or that band or that movement or that missionary, and those people may very well be tucked away in the kingdom of God and have had a regenerated heart. But don't assume just because you're gifted, because they're gifted, that fruit is actually coming out of their lives. And the reverse could also be said, and I want you to hear this point. Just because you aren't the most gifted or charismatic, that you're not being asked to take prominent positions of leadership within a church or within the movement of the kingdom, don't assume then that you're going to be way back in line in heaven. Because the kingdom of heaven doesn't work that way. Jesus said these radical things like the first will be last and the last will be first. Far better to be fruitful than gifted. It's kind of like asking this ridiculous question that we all with our moral compass would say we know how to answer this, but we don't really want to answer it this way. Would you rather be beautiful or smart? Well, like kind of the virtuous side of you says smart. The carnal side of you is like, I want to be awesome. I just want to look awesome. And in the kingdom, it's would you rather be gifted or fruitful? Well, I'll tell you what, fruit gets you into heaven, gifting does not. And fruit is something that you're not gifting is something that you're not really in charge of. There are limits to your level of giftedness. Even the best have limits. There's always going to be someone better, someone smarter, someone more talented, someone who can sing better, preach better, do better, go further, much better than you. But in the arena of spiritual fruit, the level of kindness and patience and joy and long suffering that you demonstrate in your life, there are no limits on that. And you can do much more in the long run at a deeper heart level, leaning in on spiritual fruit than you'll ever do just depending on your natural charisma or even the anointing of God in giftedness. Again, I'm not against giftedness, but it's from God and it has its limits and it isn't an indication of your standing in heaven. And I know a lot of people feel terrible about themselves because they're not as gifted as other people. I mean, I spent the last 10 days around some very gifted men. I sat down with a lot of pastors from big churches all over the state of Oregon. And you know what? In my human sense, I just felt inferior. I have one friend. He invented something. He's an engineer. He built his own house. He rocks a mega church. I mean, the guy is a phenomenal human being. He can talk circles around me. He can argue both sides of the same point and win. And I just sit there and listen and take notes. And I'm thinking, this guy's just Yoda smart. Like, this is incredible. He's incredibly gifted. And you know what? On some level, I think, man, I'm just such a worm. This guy's awesome. But then the Spirit of God comes and reminds all of us that that's just not how the kingdom of heaven works. That guy's level of gifting, if it's not for the Lord, then in the end of the day, he's going to hear that was for nothing. That gained nothing. Or you might help somebody. Like Paul said, I don't want to, having preached to others, end up a castaway myself. In other words, it is possible to be very effectively used in people's lives and yet not even know the God in whom you preach and serve, so-called with your gifted self. So what I rest on is this. We are a people who believe the main indicator that God is at work deep in my life is when my life starts to bear the marks of spiritual fruit. Love being the chief. Faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Galatians chapter 5, the list of the fruits of the Spirit, I'll just read them off to you. As Paul the Apostle speaks about spiritual fruit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Paul said of these things earlier on, especially love, this is the more excellent way. So I would commend this to you. Let's keep on focusing our attention on love. Do we ignore spiritual gifts? No, we don't. But listen to me, in balance, 1 Corinthians 14 says, pursue the way of love and earnestly desire spiritual gifts. In that order, Love has got to be the engine driving spiritual gifts, or it will amount to nothing at the end of the day. I don't want my life to amount to nothing. And what Jesus is looking for is far different than what everybody else will evaluate your life on. How charismatic, how gifted, how many people, how much money, how much, and then you start to evaluate your life with those same metrics, and God says, I have a whole different metric system. What is the fruit coming out of my life? So spiritual gifts are not the light on the dashboard that indicate how the engine is doing. See, you can have a great paint job, and you can have a nice set of new tires, all shiny rims, but if the engine's blown inside, the car won't go anywhere no matter how good it looks. And in the kingdom of heaven, we've got to realize we don't get in by merit. We get in by grace. The grace of God is what saved you, friends, and the grace of God is what keeps you. Not your own giftedness, not your own smartness or your own cuteness. You get into heaven by the grace of God. The demonstration of your life being born new is the love of God born out in your life. So, I love the exciting talk about spiritual gifts, and I'm excited about getting into pneumatology, and we will. We won't avoid that. We'll talk about tongues and prophecy, and Adam talked about the way the body works and spiritual gifting, and that's all exciting stuff. I want the word of knowledge, and I want the word of faith, and I want prophecy, and I want to see tongues and interpretation and miracles happen. But if that never happens in our community, but we are a community known by our love, then guess what? That's a winning community. So let's not get our attention off the main prize and even forget why Paul wrote 1 Corinthians chapter 13. To correct a church that had gone off its wheels. They had all the outward signs of being an amazing church, but they weren't loving. And they weren't loving, they weren't nothing. And that's definitely the place that we have got to find ourselves as we consider spiritual gifts. That we look at love as the ultimate mark of whether or not we're a church that Jesus is breathing on. So I want to say this, and this is actually it for me this morning. But I think this is maybe the most important point on this 1 Corinthians 13 passage, and that's this. 1 Corinthians 13 is descriptive, not prescriptive. You know the difference? The last thing I want you to do is run out of here with 1 Corinthians 13 in your pocket saying, I've got to be all these things. I've got to be long-suffering. I've got to be kind. I've got to live out. This is my to-do list. This is the way that I'm going to actually be approved by God. And if you look at that as a to-do list, then you've looked at 1 Corinthians entirely wrong. 1 Corinthians 13 says, when the Spirit of God renews the heart, this is what you'll begin to behave like. This is the new nature that you're going to receive. That God is going to download His nature into yours. Are you perfectly long-suffering and patient and kind and all these things? No. I'm certainly not. But I recognize that when God begins to rebirth me, renew me, I'm growing in these areas, and that's what I want to be. This is the kind of person that I long to be, but I don't run out on my own trying to behave in this way, but actually I just say, God, this is who you make us when you make us new. And so the main test of genuine Christianity is, do I love God? And do I love people? Do I do any of those perfectly? Absolutely not. But is there something deep in my heart that says, even if I don't have ultimate success externally, if I'm loving God and loving people, I'm living the right kind of life? Guys, it's so simple. And yet our attention gets a billion different other places, and we think that the kingdom measures us differently than it does. But Jesus is saying, when I renew your heart by grace, you will become a more loving person. That's where I want to grow. I just want to be more loving. I want the fruit of the Holy Spirit to be born out in my life. And that is not going to come by creating a to-do list. That's going to come by me abiding in the vine. Being in love with the lovely one. He starts to rub off on you. His life starts to be lived through yours. You start to be like Psalm 1 describes, the tree planted by a river of water whose leaf does not wither, and whatever it does is prospers because it's planted in a good place. And by nature it sucks the nutrients from the river and it's able to bear fruit naturally. Fruit isn't something you strain to do. In my church back home in Oregon, our pastor used to always talk about how the apple tree doesn't strive to produce its fruit. And, he's a big guy. He'd just be up there and he'd be straining and like pretending to be an apple tree. And an apple tree isn't like, "Rrr!" One time he did it so much he passed out. I'm not kidding. He like literally his knees locked and we're like, whoa, like he went overboard. But the idea is that spiritual fruit isn't by effort, right? Spiritual fruit is by being planted in a good place, by the river, in the Word of God, with the Spirit of God running in and out of you and being around the people of God. And in that kind of community, fruit just begins to bear out. And you ask someone, how did you become so fruitful? And you say, I'm just abiding in Him. I'm not trying to do this. He's doing this through me. I want to free you of legalism. I want to free you of sinful effort. There is an effortless side of Christianity that I long for us all to live in. It's that place that Ezekiel found himself in, Ezekiel, I believe, 47, where he sees from heaven a vision of the throne of God, and from the throne of God comes a river. And that river, as it flows from the throne of God, everything that river touches, life starts to break out. In desert places, life just starts to break out. And Ezekiel approaches the river of God, this flowing river with the current and all, and he steps in at his ankles and then his knees and then his waist, and then he gets caught in the river of God, and the flow of the river begins to take him downstream. He's completely overtaken by a force with an energy that is not his own. And if you don't know this, the Bible speaks a lot about the way in which the Spirit works like water, like a river. John chapter 7, Jesus said, if any of you are thirsty, let him come unto me and drink, and out of his innermost being shall flow torrents of living water. This he spoke of the Holy Spirit. How much effort does it take to float down a river with a great current? It takes no effort. You just enjoy the ride. You manage the rocks. You just go with the flow of the river stream. You know what takes a lot of effort? To turn and try to walk up against the current. If you feel like you're striving in such a way in which you're trying to bear fruit, you're doing it all wrong. This should be joyful and light. Is there effort? Yes, but it's got to be the right kind of effort. The effortless side of Christianity, though, is Ezekiel walking into a river that's already flowing. A river that started without him and will go if he doesn't get in it. The Spirit of God is at work, bearing fruit in the lives of people, and anyone who wants in can get in. And you get in, you begin to enjoy the momentum that the current of the river of God has for you. I mean, have you read the book of Acts? The book of Acts is about people caught up in the river of God. This isn't a people who are striving. The one thing Jesus told them to do is don't leave until you get power to do what you're about to do. I want you to change the world, but don't try to go change the world with your to-do lists. And you know what? When they emerged from that room, they were so filled with God that they couldn't help but be fruitful. They couldn't help but be anointed and gifted. And the world was changed. Literally, it said of that church, they that have turned the world upside down have come here as well. Enjoy walking with the Lord without all the effort and the striving and the wrong metrics of whether or not your life is important or going to count. In heaven, God isn't going to ask how spiritually gifted you were. In heaven, it's going to be, are the marks of my Son Jesus Christ upon your life? And the main mark is love. And if you start to think about your life in terms like that, then you're going to start asking the right questions. Am I becoming a more loving person? Are the marks of true Christianity in my heart, my love for God and for others, is that growing? And if it is, there should be a rejoicing in your heart. Right now, your spirit, Romans 8, should testify with his spirit with your spirit, that you belong. Right now, there should be a rejoicing of the heart to say the marks of true Christianity are upon my life. Because I have this unnatural, beautiful love for God. The opposite is also true. I think some people should be troubled. if all you are is gifted, if all you are is chasing after spiritual gifts. Follow the way of love and earnestly desire spiritual gifts. Spiritual gifts are great when they're empowered by love. But without love, they won't accomplish anything. Without love, God doesn't see them as anything. Without love, your heart has not been renewed. And so today, I just simply approach this way, is to say, on one level, relax. If God is bearing fruit in your life, that's good. It doesn't matter how gifted you are. That's not the metric of heaven. And then for some of us, maybe we need to reevaluate the way we think Christianity is. Because again, it's not by merit. Not by might. Not by power, said Zechariah the prophet, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. You know, Zechariah, he saw this vision. And he conveyed it to Israel, but it was of a candelabra, that candle that lit the inside of the tabernacle. And he saw from that candle a pipe that went from that candle, and that pipe was connected into an olive tree. And therefore the image was this: as a nation, but also as a people, Israel's oil, the oil that lights the fire in the candle, will not be oil that's produced by them, but because they're piped into the correct source, there will be a continuous source of oil flowing in. And that is the essence of the Christian life, is that we stay connected to the one from whom all goodness flows, and it flows into us and out from us. And we keep our flame lit in that way. We don't burn out. We don't strive. Amen?